Welcome to the Whole Church Podcast.
Your favorite church unity podcast.
Probably.
If you want to hear from pastors,
Professors.
and everything in between,
Right, sure.
and, the occasional train talk.
Right, yeah. Have we got the podcast for you?
All right, thank you guys for tuning in to the Whole Church Podcast. We got a very special episode. We've been telling you about this guest for probably a while. We've been really excited to talk to her. It's Sister Rose from CCM, which is Catholic Campus Ministries in Wilmington, North Carolina, part of UNCW. And yeah, it's going to be a really good one. But before we jump into it, TJ's going to tell you what all we need.
Right, so I'm TJ. That was Josh.
What?
You didn't say that?
Oh, I thought you were Josh and I was TJ.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I fixed it.
Thanks.
So, guys, we need you to consider supporting us financially on Patreon, of course. But there are some things we need that we can use to make the podcast better. We need new hardware. We need a new laptop. Or, if you want to just donate a whole studio,
Yeah,
that would be
that'd be
excellent.
great.
Yeah, let us know. We would like new software as well. And
Of course, we
probably
need
everything in between.
new cover photo for our Facebook and SoundCloud pages. If anyone has any graphic design abilities or anything, and then what's the other thing? Oh, we're also looking to update our theme song. So if any of you guys have an interest in that or are able to help us in that area, let us know. And as far as the Patreon stuff, even like this Skype call, we the last podcast we did with Chandler, we recorded and actually ran out of funds on Skype almost near the end of the episode. So I had to make sure we updated that on here. So everything costs money. So, any little bit helps, even if it's just enough to help us do another Skype call, yeah. So, and that's at patreon.com/the Whole Church Podcast.
Right.
And
we need someone to run our Twitter page.
yes, we do. Badly.
Yeah.
And
I think the current coordinator forgets we have one.
I do all the time. And if you know anyone who can help us, or if you're willing to help us, you can contact us at thewholechurch@gmail.com. Not the Whole Church Podcast, just thewholechurch@gmail.com. And also, we love to have some feedback so we can read it on the podcast. It's been a little while since we had feedback, so please just tell us we're doing okay or doing awful. Whatever.
Both of those.
Yeah, tell us both. Awesome. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into our icebreaker question. Sister Rose, we will answer first to give you time to think. I did kind of one of the more convoluted ones because I wanted to show off how cool Sister Rose was, let everybody know nuns can be cool. Also, I love Sister Rose. She's great. But yeah, so our icebreaker question today is, if Pokemon, like the video game, used real-life animals, and you were the water gym leader, who would be your main? So you don't need to know Pokemon, because they're using real-life animals in this scenario. But you're water gym leader, so we're going to do just aquatic animals in the Pokemon arena. Who would be your main go-to Pokemon/animal? And TJ, did you want to answer first?
No, I didn't.
Did you want me to answer first?
Absolutely.
I'm going to go with the killer whale.
Hmm.
Because I feel like I could probably teach it some dark type moves as well as some water moves. Kind of get some diversity in there. Plus it's got the size, and it's got the teeth, and it's got the speed. Just a really good animal for Pokemon fights. Yeah.
Right. But it has to be an animal.
Yes.
Right?
Correct.
So I can't choose a battleship.
No. No, TJ. You cannot choose a battleship.
Interesting. Well, I'd probably choose an otter. A sea otter.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, Oshawott, Duwat, Samurott, those were all otters.
What
They were
are
good
these
Pokemon.
things you're saying right now? Okay.
They are all
Those are names of... I don't know any of those. I know like first gen and that's it.
Yeah, I know.
So you would just do it because it's sort of like a Pokemon you like?
Yeah.
Okay. That's cool. So, Sister Rose, if...
It's definitely the dolphin.
Nice.
Good choice.
May I ask why?
They're smart. They're fast. They work together. They can fly high when they need to. They can dive deep when they need to. They're agile, and they'd be my choice.
All really solid reasons.
It's an excellent choice.
I feel like the dolphin would be one of those who could do, like, you know how they have those moves where that take 2 turns because it like dives deep, and then the next move it does like a bunch of damage.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see
a
it doing
dolphin
that.
could use dive and balance.
That'd be
Which are
great.
like opposite things.
That's smart. Smart move. I like it. I like it a lot. All right, so getting that out of the way, Sister Rose, I met you at UNCW. I was a student there for, I think, 2.5 years before I transferred out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm, our listeners know, I'm not Catholic. I grew up Pentecostal, the Church of God of Prophecy. But I had a friend, Zach. I don't remember how to pronounce his last name.
Tomkowski.
Tomkowski. What? Such a good last name. Zach's a great guy. But he invited me. I think y'all had like a movie night. And then he just kept inviting me to stuff with y'all's group. And I felt really included in everything you did. I was even there a couple times for stuff like, I think y'all burned incense and a couple different things. I was there during some sacraments. I never was able to participate, but that never made me feel left out. Can you speak some on how y'all were able to do that? Because I know I'm not the only one. There's been other non-Catholics that have been part of the group and just felt included. How do y'all kind of create that culture of inclusiveness?
Well, it goes back to our mission. Mission statements are important. And so we have been blessed that we happen to have a house on the edge of campus. And so part of our mission is gathering students together to build community, communities of support. So besides the fact that I'm here to meet, education and sacramental needs, for the Catholic students, part of our mission, and I'm not putting them, they're side by side, is a mission of hospitality. College campuses can sometimes be intense, crazy places. And so to try to create a space where people can be welcome, where they can be respected, that, that they can just relax. I mean, relaxation is really important. To build a community, not only, especially a community of faith, it's not just about worship. Worship is important. It's central to what we do, but it's responding to the physical, the social, the psychological, cravings of today's young people. So it's a ministry of hospitality, which is what you experience. And, our joke is, underneath our sign where it says Catholic Campus Ministry, we say characters welcome. So maybe, Josh, that's why you felt so comfortable.
That's almost definitely true. Oh, man. Yeah. I mean, you talk about hospitality. It brings me back because I'm like, I think it's been probably about 9 years since I was, actively around. But I remember, I think it was the first set of finals. I'm just a young college guy. I didn't know anything about Catholic faith. I don't know really anything about anything other than being a Pentecostal. I was a little bit of a recluse, and I remember that I was kind of having a rough patch. I didn't really talk to anybody. I wasn't going out doing stuff. But I heard that you guys were doing a pizza night. And I was like, man, I am hungry. Finals do suck. Pizza sounds great. And it was like a really bright, nice moment in the middle of, finals and winter can kind of be kind of dark. So it was good. So how do you get the students on board? Because it's not just, you and the leaders, producing that inclusive. What's the word I'm looking for, DJ?
Inclusiveness or inclusivity?
Inclusivity. Yeah, that's what I want. Yeah, it's not just the leaders creating that culture, but even the students. Zach kept inviting me to stuff. How do you get the students on board with this?
Well, I think, it has to do with, as I said, there's a core group. And when they feel comfortable, when they feel that they're listened to, when they feel that they're respected, they want to share that. When you have good news, when something's good, you want to tell somebody else about it. And you can't force that. I open the door. It's funny you should mention pizza, because when I was first sent here, I had a meeting with the bishop, and I told him from the beginning that besides, the maintenance of the house, my highest line item is going to be food. Food's important, especially for young adults.
Oh, it
and as you recall, I think you had more than one Wednesday night dinner, and I take those meals very seriously. We put tablecloths down, real cloths. And there is a real art and skill to sitting at a table, eating a meal, and having good conversation. And today, a lot of students don't have that experience at home. And so for me, Eucharist is central to us. But how can you understand what is going on during a Mass when we're celebrating the Eucharist if you don't understand what it means to break bread at the table? So I take those meals very seriously. Then also, I kind of think I have some memories of you being at a couple Tuesday breakfasts also.
Oh, yeah.
And Tuesday morning breakfast from, 7 to 10 creates the space, and the rules of engagement, as you will recall, is you sit at the counter and I cook your breakfast. And during that time, we will talk about whatever you want to talk about, or if you don't want to talk at all. And so I would say that my best ministry is done in the midst of a meal. And you know what? There's this great precedent for that. As you may recall,
Mother Teresa.
You go through the scriptures, go through the Gospels and look at all the times that Jesus is at having table fellowship.
Oh, yeah. I actually talked about that on the podcast a couple times before, even when I specifically remember Mormon Talk. As an episode, we were able to interview a Mormon family and how just sitting at a table affects your ability to be close so much.
Right.
And it is true. And, whenever she talks about, her ministry and that Tuesday morning breakfast, I remember a lot of those Tuesday mornings, just me being the curious person I remember sitting, they have like a little counter there, and she's making breakfast, and I'm just like, tell me this about the Catholic faith. Well, how do y'all feel about this? How do you feel about this? How come you can do this and this person can't do that? And I feel like I probably asked you everything under the sun I could think of relating to the Catholic faith.
Yeah, and you see, here's the thing. I would argue, if people are trying to understand what communion is, all right, that if you're having table fellowship and there's a quality of conversation where each of the participants is fully present, okay, that conversation is transformed into communion. All right, so that's the quality of attention that I strive for. And that's the kind of presence, quality of presence that transforms hearts, that helps somebody say, I'm okay, that, I'm loved, I'm cared about. And I think that's what, is lacking in our world today. And so that's very intentional on my part, to try to create that space where people can be themselves, authentically be themselves, ask the questions that are on their minds and hearts. And, we're all seekers. So, I have a lot of epistemological humility. There are things I know about, but I'm a life learner. So I'm learning from the students as much as the students may be learning from me.
Actually,
I think that's probably what you experienced.
Oh, yeah. I remember you using the phrase life learner a lot. I think that's something I kind of picked up from. And I also do want to say, while we're on the podcast, that I think a large part of why I'm so eager to try and include people of the Catholic faith in the whole church podcast is because of my time at UNCW, where I was able to experience and see the genuineness of your faith and hospitality and inclusiveness and all of that. It's really powerful. And, like, you're right there. You barely off of campus. I didn't even know the house was off of campus until like a year in. I was like, oh, I thought it was on campus. It's so close. But I think it's a powerful thing whenever you have meals, especially with college students, like you were saying. I know the other college ministry I was involved with at UNCW was Crossway Ministries. And one of the big things they did is they had different families take in a student and have a meal with them once a month or something. And I think it's really kind of underplayed by a lot of older generations exactly how dark college can be for some people. All the stress, all of the, I have people, I work at Chipotle, I'm a manager, and I know I have people who work full-time and are a full-time student, barely holding on to their grades and their job, and it's hectic. It's crazy for a lot of them. And just to have someone care enough to sit down and make them breakfast, that changes their whole world, And it's really powerful.
You're being evaluated all the time when you're a college student.
Oh, yeah.
You're being evaluated in your classes. You're living in close quarters, so you're being evaluated or judged sometimes by people on your hall. And you're living in such close quarters with a population of people who are all the same age, more or less, who are experiencing a lot of freedom but lack experience. And so, in one sense, for a young person to be thrown into that, it's like, wow, this is great. But then you discover that you got to find ways to stay grounded, to keep your feet on the ground, because you can get swept away in all sorts of things. And so part of what the ministry does is just to say, be who you were created to be. That's seek to find what God's desire is for you, and live that. That's the message. Become the best you can be, the best Josh you can be, the best TJ you can be. And don't worry about the other stuff, and I mean, people coming into this house is utterly gratuitous. I'm not judging them. I'm not evaluating them. I'm welcoming them. And also, as you may recall, I'm visually impaired. So I don't go far from the campus. So I'm either walking the campus, I'm in the student union, or I'm here, and you remember I live right next door. So while the students are here, they know where to find me. And so if they get jammed up, they know they can call me. So I think the consistency of that, the steadfastness of that, is a comfort when people are far away from home.
Oh yeah. And what's really interesting too was, for me anyway, is we're holiness Pentecostal. We're very, conservative, by the book, and I kind of grew up a little sheltered because of that. And so I think going to college, living in a dorm, saw a lot of stuff that I've never even thought of before, So having places like CCM, y'all's house, it provided like a safe place. And I think that was really important to me, especially at that time. And I think it's important for people, if you are near a college, to do that, have meals, invite someone from the college over, give them a safe place. Sometimes they need that. But yeah, so I'm really glad that you're still doing all of that and that you were there for that. You're a nun with the Catholic Church. But
yes.
See, that threw me when I first started going there, because you don't dress like the nuns on TV or, act like the nuns on TV. What are some of the misconceptions you think people, from outside the Catholic faith, or, basically the other me's out there who haven't ran into Sister Rose yet? What do you think some of the misconceptions are that they have?
I think primarily there's a monolithic view of what a religious person, a member of a religious congregation is. And there's some reason for that. Some of the habits that some of the congregations have worn in the past were kind of unique within the 20th, 21st century. But I think that there's a vision of or a perception of sisters. I'm not Whoopi Goldberg. I can't sing and I can't dance.
That's sad.
Actually, I can dance, but
Praise God.
not like Whoopi Goldberg. But I think it's interesting because from the apostolic age, the early, the beginning of the church as we know it, okay, there have always been people who have felt called to be set apart. All right, and we had the desert fathers and the desert mothers who left the towns and villages and went off and lived as hermits in the desert. And then we study church history. There have been various needs that have come up, and in response to those needs, there have been people who have felt called. So, we have the Benedictines, the monasteries, that sprung up during the Middle Ages, for example. And, they became centers of education. Then, there was the monasteries that housed both monks and nuns. Okay, there were men and women's monasteries. They took vows of stability, which meant they not only entered a religious community, but they entered a particular monastery and they stayed there. They didn't move around. All right. So then we have the advent of like the Franciscans and the Dominicans. All right. And the Franciscans, founded by Francis of Assisi, had this call to serve the poor, and they were moving around, going to where the poor were located. The Dominicans were mendicants. Okay. They were itinerant preachers. So they went from town to town preaching. So there are Franciscan women and there are Franciscan men. There are Dominican men and there are Dominican women. Then after the Reformation, there was a move towards apostolic religious life. Okay, men and women who were going to serve the church in the marketplace, so to speak. People going out. So you have the Jesuits that were founded, in the 1500s, and they were educators, and they put themselves at the service of the Pope. My congregation, the Sisters of St. Ursula, we were founded in 1606, and the woman who founded us was a woman by the name of Anne de Saintonge, and she was educated by her father. But at the time, girls were not being educated. Girls and women did not have an education. And the prevailing thought then is if you weren't educated in the faith, you could not be saved. And so she was very concerned about the souls of all the girls and the women who were not educated. And she lived right next to a Jesuit college. And so she saw all these boys being educated. So she wanted to start a school where girls could receive an education. But she didn't want to be cloistered, which is to say she did not want to be in a monastery where, you went in an enclosure where you went in and you never came out. So we are a congregation of women who are non-cloistered, have never been cloistered.
Wow.
And at the time, she wore the widow's dress of the day, contemporary dress for her time. She was also very much taken by the spirituality of St. Ignatius of Loyola. So we're Ignatian in our spirituality. And lastly, we have a mission of education. But she grew up in a time of Christian humanism. So we have a very broad understanding of what that education is about. So almost all of the women in my community have a background in formal classroom education, but we have gone beyond that to education in whatever we do. All right. So here for myself here at CCM, everything I do is as an educator. But getting back to those stereotypes, my congregation continued to wear the widow's dress of, the early 1600s into the 20th century. Okay, and we spread to the United States, throughout Europe, and we had sisters who then were in the 50s who were going to Africa. We were invited by the Vatican to go back and look at our roots, look at the founding charism, the spirit of our community. And what our community discovered in doing that is the three elements that I mentioned before, non-cloister, Christian education, and Ignatian spirituality are the essential elements that make us who we are. And we are wearing black serge with a widow's peak that made us look like Mickey Mouse. And that became a modern day cloister because it set us apart from the people we were there to serve. And so for us, wearing that dress didn't make any sense in terms of our founding charism. So for us, that's why we gave up wearing that habit, that particular dress. Now, for other congregations, this is what's really important. Not every religious congregation is the same, okay? There is a particular spirit about that congregation. When a young woman asks me about entering religious life, I said, you have to go around and meet them and, they have come and see where you can live with them for a while. And I said, ultimately, it's kind of like finding the congregation where you can smell your mother's chicken soup. I mean, there's a spirit that draws you to a congregation. And so, each one is different. And so I think to get back to this is a long-winded response to your question, but to get back to your initial question, the big misconception is that we're all the same. And we're not. We have a different charism. We have different ministries. And what's really interesting is that there are still people who feel called to be hermits. There are people who still feel called to the monasteries. There are people who still feel called to mendicant congregations. There are people who feel called to Franciscan spirituality. So when you look at religious life in the Catholic Church, it's like a mosaic. It's not that one ended and another one began. They're still alive and about, some people are concerned that there's been a diminishment in the number of people called to religious life. And I would say that's not my concern, okay, because we're all called to holiness in various ways. And in the past, women did not have many options. You either married and stayed home and raised a family, you became a teacher, you became a nurse, you became a secretary. Women didn't have the options. And it was kind of interesting because women who entered religious life had the privilege of going on for more education. I mean, the first PhD in computer science was earned by a sister.
Oh, wow, really?
Huh.
Yeah,
That's
there's a little
fascinating.
factoid for you. But there, we had the opportunities for education as women religious. But, there are a lot of women today who are faith-filled, who take their faith seriously, who may not feel called to taking vows, religious vows, and they are able to use their gifts for the good of, the world. So, I think that's part of what you're seeing in terms of people have this stereotypic view. Now, I can tell you, even within the Catholic Church, whenever there are publications and they're talking about religious, they always go find a sister who's wearing a habit because the picture's worth 1,000 words. And for the religious today who wear habits, the habit has a very specific meaning for them, okay, because of their spirit and charism. The veil has a very specific meaning for them, okay. It did not have those meanings for us. So, it's not like one is better than the other. It's because our charisms and our missions are different.
Wow.
And how we express that is different. So that's, as you say, you meet me and it's like, as soon as somebody hears I'm a sister, they, think I'm very naive and innocent in terms of what goes on in the world. But like here, for example, here in Wilmington, for 10 years, I ran the outreach office down at the Basilica Shrine of St. Mary's. And so I've probably been in places that you have never been. So unfortunately, I'm very much aware of the suffering in this world. I know who's living under the bridges. And back in the 90s, I had the occasion of rescuing babies out of crack houses, none of which I'd recommend, but it needed to be done at that time. And so, being a religious is a very privileged place because I can travel in many circles, whether it's in areas of power or in the margins of society. And my goal is to make Jesus Christ known and loved. And the way I do that is by the way I live my life.
Wow. Man, I feel like we're going to have to do another podcast sometime just to ask you about all of that stuff you've seen and done. It's fascinating. I didn't even know any of that. But
yeah. The other thing that's interesting too is, like in the United States, there are religious congregations who were founded here in the U.S., and they're only in the U.S.
Wow.
We are an international congregation. We were founded, as I meant, in Dole, France, and right now our headquarters is in Tours, France. But we are in the United States, we're in Europe, and we're in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We're part of a federation of sisters who are also, founded by Anderson Polish. And, so we're in India, we're in South Africa, we're in Chad, we're in Ivory Coast, in Switzerland, Belgium. We have headquarters in those countries as well. And so, for example, last June, I spent I spent all of June in the DRC.
Oh, wow.
And so what happens being part of an international congregation, we are always challenged to broaden our horizons and views because sometimes we, as Americans, can be unconsciously drawn into American exceptionalism, that the way we do things is the best way. All right? We do things differently. And, efficiency and pragmatism are very much part of the American psyche. But when you travel and when you are, in my case, I have the privilege of being in places in the Congo that, a tourist would never be. Living with my own Congolese sisters, or my European sisters, there's a call to some humility to recognize that things can be done differently, but yet that which is essential, that spirit, that charism that we all, are called to, connects us in a very deep level. So I can go into any one of our houses anywhere in the world and I can feel at home. And that's something that amazes me, never ceases to amaze me.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, that's a lot of... Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I don't say it's a lot to take in. I know it's really, really cool. You said apostolic tradition. I think I'm slaughtering the word.
Apostolic.
Apostolic, yeah. I really like that. I really enjoy. I like ministries that go to the people. So I enjoy that a lot. I also find it really interesting how even inside the Catholic Church, there's such diverse congregations and yet still unity. And I think that speaks volumes to what we want to talk about here. You know, the whole church podcast, all about church unity. Your favorite church unity podcast, probably. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it speaks volumes to all of that. Just knowing that there's such diversity like that, and still, you know, you said you feel home all these other places. There's still that inclusivity, and that's really cool. Also, I just have a side note here. I don't know how it fits in here, but Sister Rose loves body surfing. She's just a normal, really cool person. Also, why do you love body surfing, Sister Rose? Can you talk to us just for a second about body surfing?
Because I feel the need for speed.
Excellent.
Good time. That's a great answer.
Have you considered drag racing?
What's that?
Have you considered drag racing?
Well, you know, I've thought about that because you don't really need to see because you're going in a straight line, you know, so that's got possibilities, but it is really loud, you know, and you know, I have very sensitive ears. So, you know, I haven't done it. Let's just say that. I do know how to drive. I have brothers who taught me how to drive. You know, they suggested that perhaps I might be in the best shape of anyone in the car, so I should know how to operate a vehicle. But because of my vision, you know, they kind of like you to be able to see beyond the hood, and I can't do that. But the ocean, my dad was, during World War II, was in the Coast Guard. And among other things, he was a swim instructor. And he and my aunts were, you know, ocean people. And actually my name, McNamara, is in the Celtic language means son of the sea. So perhaps I really should be Nico Mara, daughter of the sea. But I was in the ocean on the eastern end of Long Island before I could walk. Wow. And I learned a lot about the ocean, both from my father and from a very wise woman who was our neighbor, who was the daughter of whalers from eastern Long Island. They came down from New England, and they were out there for generations upon generations, and she taught us a lot. But the thing about body surfing is, I think it's a great metaphor for life, because you have to learn the rhythm of the waves, the sets of the waves as they come. And you have to make the judgment to go or not to go, to dive, to jump, or to ride. And you may think it's the perfect wave. You push off, you swim into the wave, and you're on the crest, and you may have the ride of your life. Or you may get rolled. You might have done everything right, but the wave just changed and you got rolled. And when you get rolled, you know, if you tighten up your body, you're going to get hurt. If you just let the chaos take you for a little bit and, you know, pay attention to which way the bubbles are going, you'll know which way is up, which way you'll find air to breathe. And you can get back in there and ride another wave. And for me, when I'm out in the ocean, I'm nowhere else. It's an activity that makes me completely present to the moment. Everything else in my mind disappears, and you just wait for that one wave where you feel like you're flying. And I think that's the draw to body surfing. And then when the day is done and you come out of the water and sit on the sand, you know, there's nothing for me that's more satisfying.
Wow.
So body surfing for me is sort of a metaphor for life.
Wow.
And the thing is that when you're in the ocean, you are a guest, you know, and the ocean is always going to win. And so what you have to do is to be very respectful. My father taught us 3 rules of the ocean. Never turn your back on the ocean. Rule number 2, only breathe when there's air. And rule number 3 is not to forget rule number 1 or rule number 2.
Good rules. Good rules.
Nice one. Yeah, so I think that was a good intro. Now we all know Sister Rose pretty well. TJ, would you like to start the podcast?
Oh, yeah, of course. So, you mentioned that you lived in the DRC. did you live in Kinshasa or did you live in?
I flew through Kinshasa to Lubumbashi.
Okay. Yeah, I've always been super interested.
Lubumbashi is the second largest city, and it's in the Shaba, the Katanga region.
Right. Yeah, I've always been super interested in that whole part of Africa, just because it has a really tumultuous history.
Oh, it has a tremendously tumultuous history. And it's also an absolutely beautiful country, rich in natural resources, but its history with Belgium, and now China actually, but it's a different kind of relationship. You know, so many of the people still live in abject poverty because they've never been able to benefit from the resources of their own country.
It's awful, but it is such an incredible country. And even in Kinshasa, you can tell the city is where everyone with money lives. And directly outside of the city is poverty.
Yeah, and what you're seeing is, like, for example, Kinshasa and Lubumbashi were Belgian. They were built like Belgian cities. I mean, and you can see the architecture. And that was, you know, when it was, you know, King Leopold it was his playground, you know. And then what happened when Mobutu Sese Seko became the dictator, one of the things that he swore to do was to destroy the infrastructure that the Belgians had introduced. So, like, when our sisters who were there in the 50s, you know, it was the Jacquemin mines in Lubumbashi that was making arrangements for the sisters to come to teach in the schools. But the sisters' homes had electricity and running water and so forth. After Mobutu took charge, you know, all of that disappeared. And you walk around in some sections of Lubumbashi, you see, you know, it looks like you know, a war-torn city. But once you get outside of the cities, into the cité and then into the bush, you know, it's a whole nother story.
Right. So that was just a tangent about, you know, PRC that I don't want to talk about. But I'm actually really glad you mentioned the Catholic Reformation while you're answering Josh's last question, which was 15 minutes ago. But but what exactly, for ourselves and our listeners, what exactly happened during the Catholic Reformation? And more specifically, the Council of Trent, if that's not too much to ask.
You can take the course on that. Let's see. How can I speak to this briefly? I think one of the first things I would say is this. You know, we often have this view of history that's somewhat linear. We like, there's the Protestant Reformation, the Catholic Reformation, or the Counter-Reformation. And it wasn't linear at all, I would argue. I think what's interesting is really to understand Martin Luther, and I think we often use shorthand when we speak about, you know, how the Reformation came about. I think Martin Luther was a very faithful academician and monk who came of age in a time when there was a lot of corruption and in the Vatican and at the highest levels. And, you know, as you well know, the issue was the sale of indulgences. And they were quite zealous about selling these indulgences, and the funding from that was going towards building St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. There were abuses. I mean, it was not a great time in the history of the church with respect to its pastoral mission. And Luther was pointing that out. And, you know, I don't think, realized what he was up against in terms of, you know, the myopic vision at that point and the goal of raising money for Rome. And, we talk about, okay, what happened? When did the Reformation start? When it's like, we all have that date, right? October, 31st, right? Luther put the 95 Thesis on the door of the church in Wittenberg. Well, he wasn't doing something very radical then. What he was doing, he was an academician and he wanted to debate this because he was really worried about the church. He's worried about the corruption. They were selling these indulgences to people who couldn't afford to buy them. They were taking, it was not out of their excess, it was out of their want. And they were being convinced that this was going to save them and save their dead relatives, for example. Okay? So Luther really is trying to point out something from within the church as a faithful monk. And the forces that he was coming up against were digging their heels in. All right. And so the more they dug he kept saying, show me where I'm wrong. And, they were using the authority of the church as their argument. And so it moves Luther further and further in questioning. And, we can talk about, sacraments, the role of scripture and all of the various things that Luther stood for. And, he was speaking on behalf of all these people who had great burden on, put upon them over this, these sales of indulgences. And so, yes, the Reformation happened. And what it called the church to is taking his challenges and saying, okay, who is the Catholic Church and who's in and who's out? And so it's interesting in the Council of Trent, there was a lot of anathema sic, which is, if you do this, you're in, and if you don't do this, you're out, and so it was a challenge to the Catholic Church, to define who it was and what made you faithful and what put you outside the church. And it also, had the church further define, for example, the sacramentality of the priesthood, and the sacraments in general. So there were good things that came out of this Council of Trent. It forced the issue of further defining itself within the context of the Reformation itself. So, it was political powers, it was religious powers, intention, and as is every ecumenical council, there's an agenda that is set forth by the lived experience that causes the church itself to redefine itself. And, we see that in scripture. You go back to the first Council of Jerusalem. Does a follower of Jesus have to become a Jew first? Okay, so they had a debate. They had to decide, is this necessary? And they said, no, it was not necessary. All right, so Trent was triggered by, the Reformation that was taking place in particularly, Germany and, in the area that Luther was, influential. And so, as I mentioned, the Jesuits, were established and they became educators in the faith. So, Trent forced the church to further define what it meant to be a member, what we believe, just as, other councils. And then the religious congregations became, open schools to further the faith. And that's the same thing that happened with the Second Vatican Council. When Pope John the 23rd called the Second Vatican Council, the issue at hand was we had been through this whole period of the Enlightenment that launched us into modernity. And then the question was, how does the church live in the modern world? And so that ecumenical council came to address those questions. Now, Trent, went over, let me just think. I think it was around 1545 to 1563. So there were multiple sessions of that council. And then the documents were, promulgated. With the Second Vatican Council, it started in 63 and went till about 67, I think. So when we talk about these councils, we're not talking about let's get together for a few days and have a meeting. We're talking about major preparation, the best thinkers and theologians and church leaders coming together to prayerfully consider what is needed in the church at that time.
Right. And do you feel like the church is closer because of the Council of Trent, or not?
Well, I would say that in the Catholic Church, the highest teaching authority is the Ecumenical Council. All right. And so I'd say today's church is still in the process of receiving the teachings of the Second Vatican Council. So, that council addresses much more what it means to live in a modern age, and we're still trying to interpret that and understand that. What's interesting in the teaching of the Catholic Church, okay, you have a teaching promulgated, and then we have what's called the sensus fidelium, the sense of the faith. So you have a council, but then it takes years for the faithful to fully receive the teaching. And sometimes there are teachings that take hold more than others. And so, sure, there are contributions that Trent has made towards our thinking, our religious imagination. But I think for Catholics today, the teaching of the Second Vatican Council is the most recent council and the highest teaching authority. And so I think Catholics are still trying to digest and to understand the teachings from that council. What amazes me is, for example, in the mid-20th century, the Catholic Church had this convergence of major theological thinkers emerge, all of whose theology was influenced and informed by the First and Second World Wars. So when I say that, I'm thinking about people like Yves Congar, Joseph Ratzinger, who later became Benedict XVI, Karl Rahner, Balthasar, Henry de Lubac. There were these amazing thinkers, and then of course the American theologian John Courtney Murray, who pretty much wrote the document on religious liberty. So I would say, if you want to know about what's informing the thinking of today's Catholic Church, it's the teachings of the Second Vatican Council and how we're understanding them. And if you look at the past couple of popes, you have, John Paul II, St. John Paul, who grew up during the war, experienced the war, and was just coming on the coming of age as a philosopher, playwright, and theologian during the council. Joseph Ratzinger, who became Benedict XVI, was one of the great thinkers of the council. But our current Pope Francis is a bit younger, and so he is the product of the Second Vatican Council. So it's very interesting.
And he's the first one.
Yeah, he's the first. Yeah, absolutely. Joseph Ratzinger was a priest and theologian during the council, and then he was a bishop, and then he was he was the prefect for the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, which is one of the offices of the Vatican. and then he was elected Pope and took the name Benedict XVI.
Very cool. So, would you say?
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
Okay, I was just going to ask. Would you say since Protestants split from the Church and the Catholic Reformation, all that happened, do you think the Protestant and Catholic Church is moving further away from each other or closer together?
Well, I wouldn't use the generalization of a Protestant church. You can look at the different denominations, and for example, theologically, the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church have resolved many of our differences. But what we recognize is that our traditions have gone in different directions. So there's a lot of work that's been done in terms of what we call ecumenical dialogues. Okay, so that is dialogues between the various Christian denominations. There's a lot of work that's been done with the Anglican Church, for example. So I would not use an umbrella term of Protestant churches because the various denominations within Protestantism have their own differences and their own theology, for example.
Okay.
All right.
Now, you know what, Josh, I was thinking. Do you remember the symbol we use here at CCM? Or we have a logo, we have a motto, and a symbol that we use as our logo. Do you remember what it is?
Not off the top of my head, unfortunately.
Okay, it's the scallop shell. And the scallop shell goes back to the pilgrimages, the Camino. People were doing pilgrimages across Europe to Santiago Compostela in Spain.
Okay.
And that shell is the symbol of the pilgrim because the pilgrims carried them because you could drink water with them, you could eat food with them. There are many things you could do, but if you visualize the scallop shell, the striations go from one central point to the edges. Clams, they're sort of concentric circles. If you look at the lines on a shell of a clam, but the scallop shell all go to one foci, one point. And part of the reason I like that symbol is because we all are on our own, we're all on journeys, but all of our journeys, hopefully, are bringing us closer to God, that one point. And that's why that symbol is meaningful to me, and that's why we adopted that symbol here at Campus Ministry, because we're all pilgrims on a journey, and we have to find our way to God.
It's a good picture.
So you said one of your charisms. Is that the right word?
Okay, yes, the carrot. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, one of your charisms is inclusivity. Is that?
What part of our charism? It comes from the Christian humanistic position of our foundress, or her, that has influenced how our community, our manner of being, and it has to do with recognizing that each person is created in the image of God and has a dignity and uniqueness about them. And therefore, when we encounter the other, we encounter them with an openness and hospitality.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. So how can we encourage that spirit of hospitality and inclusivity within the whole church, not just the Catholic Church?
Well, I think we can go to the Gospels and look at Jesus and look at who Jesus welcomes and how Jesus welcomes and what Jesus teaches. Last week I was teaching a class on the incarnation, and I was tying it into each person of faith's call to discipleship. And I said to this class, there are many people who look to the cross and they find their call to discipleship in the shadow of the cross. I'm somewhat influenced by the writings of Duns Scotus, who was a Franciscan theologian, and he talks about the incarnation as the fulfillment of God's love for his creation. And so I suggest that perhaps we need to look at our call to discipleship in the shadow of the manger. Think about God becoming human in Jesus and choosing to become an infant, a vulnerable infant to a poor couple, being born in a manger. I mean, that's extraordinary. Think about that. And so there's something to tell us about that. And there's something that Jesus' early ministry and his teachings has to tell us about how we ought to be with one another. Jesus was a Jew, and Jesus' message was to be welcoming of everyone. Think of the Syrophoenician woman, think of the woman caught in adultery, think of the lepers, think of all the people whose lives Jesus touched. I think there's a real message in that. And I get right back to table fellowship. Josh, I'm sure you were here when I invited the student leaders here to contact the other religious leaders. And I said, Thanksgiving is a uniquely American celebration. Well, I mean, other countries have it, but we celebrate Thanksgiving at a particular time. I said, wouldn't it be great if we could have an interfaith prayer service to mark Thanksgiving? And, they sent emails to the other church leaders, and they never got together. They never were face to face. And I said, what the problem is here is you don't know each other. You're abstractions to each other. So that's when we decided to do an interfaith Thanksgiving dinner. And so we invited the Muslim Student Association, the Hillel group. We invited the smaller groups because there are, Crew and, Crossroads are much larger than we are, and Overflow is larger, So we invited the Presbyterian group and the Episcopalian group, and we had set up tables of 10, and we mixed the group up. And what I invited people to do before we began our meal was to go around and introduce themselves and to say one thing they were thankful for. And what was most extraordinary to me was those students sat at those tables for over 2 hours talking.
Wow.
And, it was, for some of the Muslim students, they had never talked to Catholic students or Jewish students or whomever. They've always stayed within their own group. And so for me, it was a real Thanksgiving because it broke down walls and barriers, and fear, because fear is what keeps us separated, more than anything else. There are differences, but diversity can be enriching, if we're not afraid. It's like what I said to you, going to the Congo, for example. I am an American. I mean, I think like an American. And I am not better or lesser a person than, the sisters I was visiting. We think differently about a lot of things because of our life experience. But I am enriched, and I am a better person for having those relationships with people from different parts of the world or people who have different confessions. It enriches me, and it's not, it's nothing to fear. I think one of the things we're dealing with today is, we're being fed a lot of, information that's telling us we should be afraid. This whole growth of nationalism throughout the world, it's us and them. the more that we can see ourselves as a we, sharing a common humanity, we make strides, towards being who I think God wants us to be. For me, I think one of the most significant icons of the 20th century was that vision of the earth from the moon, the blue marble, this beautiful living, thing, this dynamic planet we live on, and we're all breathing the same air. And, the more we recognize our common humanity, we're always going to have differences. Well, families have differences, but we share a common humanity. And, the more we become human, the more we allow others to be, human and recognize them as persons, the better we treat them. I mean, what's going on at the border right now, for example, I think we fail to see these people who are fleeing, very difficult situations as fellow human beings. And, if we objectify them, or reify them, well, then we don't have to worry about them as persons, but they are persons. They're real people. And I think, the gospel calls us to pay attention to, our fellow human being. So that's how I think ultimately, we come closer together. Wow. Is by informing ourselves, educating ourselves, and being less afraid. And also, I think all of us who are people of faith have to sort of grow a little bit more in epistemological humility. Our traditions are developed over time, but we don't have all the answers. None of us have all the answers. There will be that great day, when we speak of the beatific vision, when we stand before the face of God, when things will be much clearer. But right now, we're all doing the best we can.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think the table is just such a good answer for so much. I mean, not only church unity, not only unity like you were talking about, and that the image of the blue marble really is just a fantastic image. But you're talking about breaking down walls and breaking down fear, even for people who, their main concern is spreading the gospel. You don't do it through fear and telling them they're going to hell and beating them over the shoulder. You got to break down some of those walls. When you get past fear, that's when you can have those open conversations about the gospel. And I think, the table, the hospitality, that's a real key to that. Also, this is a very Southern holidays episode. I like it. We've mentioned the birth of Christ for Christmas. We've talked about Thanksgiving and hospitality. So there we go. Happy Southern holidays, everybody.
Yeah, hospitality, my favorite Southern holiday.
Yeah, mine too, man.
Amen.
It's every day in the South, though. Every day is a holiday.
Yeah, that's why God loves South Carolina so much.
Oh, man.
So, is there a way for average Joe and Sally from Yada Yada Baptist Church to promote that feeling of inclusivity in the church? Sister Rose?
I think anything's possible. I think that, a lot of the responsibility falls on the leadership, but not leadership alone. So much comes from the grassroots. So much is organic. And the day somebody wakes up and decides they're going to be the best person they could be, more loving, more generous, less judgmental, less fearful, that's where it begins.
Yeah. Well, and, we're talking about the table. Anyone can invite someone to their table, and I'll say, to TJ's question that he didn't ask me, that, it doesn't have to be a college student. If anyone in your church, you can tell that they need a meal, invite them over, give them a meal. And if you can't think of anyone immediately, find whatever college is closest to you. Figure out what Christian organizations or Muslim organizations, whatever, are there. Contact the leader, which I'll tell you, that's how I found Sister Rose's number. Just the UNCW site has the leader of CCM on there. And ask them, hey, is there a student you think would be willing or would like a meal that I could, either go to or have them over and just give them pizza? And chances are that opportunity to help someone will absolutely arise when you try to find it.
Josh, not to open up a whole nother can of worms, but there's something that I did want to tell you. Ever since Hurricane Florence hit here, as you well know, UNCW and Wilmington in general was sort of ground zero for Florence.
Oh, yeah.
Because we were church ministry, we were very easily able to sign up as a partner with the food bank for southeastern North Carolina. And so we used the chapel as a distribution center for water and food and cleaning supplies and so forth. But what happened was, ever since I came here over 11 years ago, I've always been aware that there are students who experience food insecurity. And I have always provided emergency food quietly. You probably didn't know that, but there have always been students who are homeless or are, struggling. And so that's something that I've been doing ever since I arrived. But since we started using the chapel for a distribution center, once the storm was over and we were no longer a disaster area, we continued to do the food distribution. So every Thursday afternoon, we have Huff's Harvest Pantry, and we have the university support for this. And so UNCW now has a food pantry for students who are experiencing food insecurity every Thursday afternoon.
Wow.
And you'd be amazed at both the response on the part of the university, organizations, departments, residence life, fraternities, sororities, clubs who have all been donating food. The local churches have been donating food. And just this semester alone, we've distributed well over 100 bags of groceries to students who are experiencing food insecurity.
Wow.
And we're not unique. This is something that folks are realizing all across the country. So that is another way. Check out and see if the campus near you has a food pantry. And if it doesn't, maybe you can help get something started. But it's definitely a need. There are many students who are sent off to college and their tuition is paid for, but they, don't have the money they need to be able to pay their rent and, get their groceries. A lot of graduate students are, teaching assistants or lab assistants, and they do get their stipend, but it's often not enough to make ends meet. So I see a lot of graduate students, be waiting till get their check so they're picking up groceries. But that has gone on at CCM now, since last January.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. Yeah, they say a picture speaks 1,000 words. I'd say food speaks at least 1,000,000.
Yes. When you're hungry, you can't think about much else, So,
yeah, that's incredible.
and as I said, table fellowship. Go through the scriptures. Go look at the Gospels, and count how many occasions Jesus is sharing table fellowship.
Yeah,
there's a message there.
Yeah, I used to think it was funny, especially if you read just the end of all the Gospels, like after Jesus raises back from the dead. How many of the passages just start with, "Then Jesus was at their table," and it's like, oh, okay.
One of my favorite passages is Jesus at the lakeside cooking the fish. That's one of my favorite passages.
Just a good image. Oh, man.
Yeah.
Hence Tuesday breakfast.
Yeah, what would Jesus do? He'd make breakfast. Jeez.
He would make breakfast, and if someone doesn't like that, he'd flip their table and make more breakfast.
Make more breakfast. Yeah, fish fry. That's what Jesus would do.
Yeah.
Breakfast
Just having low country boil down.
Oh, man.
So that's what do you think we would see change in the church if people start being inclusive and everyone's helping one another, feeding each other. Everyone's having a fish fry every day.
Fish fry every day. Then we would have really high cholesterol.
Yeah.
That's the ramifications. There you go. Oh, man.
We live in hope. We speak of, Jesus' salvific act has taken place. The kingdom is at hand, but is not yet. And so we work towards that. I think what you're looking for is ultimately when the reign of God has come, is when we're all going to be at one table. But in the meantime, we have to work the best we can each day.
Good stuff. So, wrapping up finally, we like to do just a couple segments to end, and one is just for our patrons, and we do that after the outro, but the other one is called our God Moment of the Week, where we just talk about something God's done for us, or something we've seen that we're thankful for, or anything spiritual, really, in the last week that we've experienced. And it helps us kind of be more thankful. We talked about thankfulness earlier, and I think it helps our listeners remember that we're real people, which is good. I'll go ahead and start. Mine actually is of the week this time, TJ.
Oh, good job.
Yeah, I know. It was actually yesterday. We had a cold front and rain coming in, which I think most of our listeners know. I have a metal plate in my head. So cold front plus rain equals lots and lots of pain, like a whole lot of pain. And I remember in the evening, I was at work and I was trying to think of where I could get medicine or what I could do to try and kind of alleviate the headache, maybe caffeine. I was thinking of pretty much everything except for prayer. And it just kind of made me, I don't know, it was challenging to realize prayer wasn't my first thought. It was like probably 10th. And I was like, man, that's rough. And I guess my God moment of the week is just realizing I need to rely on prayer a little bit more and think about it more instead of, it being the 10th thing. So,
right.
Yeah, that's going to be mine.
Yeah. Instead of being the 10th, it should probably be the first.
Yeah, that's the goal. We'll see how it goes. I'll update everybody on God moment of the next week.
Excellent. So, my God moment of the week, this week, it wasn't going to be about anything hockey related.
Until.
Yeah, and then
nice.
The Arizona, or Phoenix, it's Arizona now. Yeah, the Arizona Coyotes. The NHL is becoming a weird place right now. 4 coaches have been fired in the past week and a half. It's a whole thing. And it's to promote inclusivity. These people are getting moved out of positions of power because they were unusually cruel or they were racist. That's not okay. And even in other things, the Coyotes, just for no real reason, decided they were going to make new jerseys to support the local children's hospital in Phoenix.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and they were just going to wear them for warm-ups and then give them away. So that's really just cool. It's nice to see such a large organization be intentional about what they're doing.
That is cool.
Yeah.
Very nice.
That's just...
Huh. So, Sister Rose, did you have a God moment of the week this week? Anything God spoken to?
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
All the time. But I think
whole week.
This past week, we had our last Mass last Sunday evening. And at that Mass, we honor the graduates. And we had 2 December graduates. And I look at these two students, and one finished a degree in elementary education last May, but stayed on to finish a double major in Spanish so that she would be able to better respond to the needs of her students and better able to communicate with the parents of children who are new immigrants. And because she stayed on, and she's bilingual, she was offered a job and she's going to start working on Monday, as a matter of fact, in 5th grade elementary language arts, which is what her passion is. And, I have had the privilege of journeying with her and watching her grow. The other student is graduating with a business degree and will be in the MLS draft in January.
Awesome.
He's going out to work. He practiced with the Atlanta team, and he's going out. He graduates tomorrow, and he goes out to practice at a combine in Colorado the next day. But he's been the captain of the soccer team here at UNCW for 2 years, and what impressed me is not so much his achievements on the pitch, but in the man he has become. And he's become, both of them have become men and women for others. And so all that they do gives God glory. And they're very conscious of that. And they both have excelled in what their path has been, their chosen path. And so whether it's the classroom or the soccer pitch, whatever we do, we can give glory to God. And I have had the privilege of walking with them, cooking them breakfast, but watching them grow and make decisions that have led them to this point. And so it gives me reason to give thanks to God for them, the gift that they are to this community and wherever they go. And it's a privileged place for me as a campus minister. I so often say I'm like the ambient light. I'm present to them in the ups and downs of their lives while they're here at UNCW, and then I get to watch them, soar. And it's I give God thanks every day. I have the best job in the world.
Wow,
Praise
that's
God.
Awesome. Yeah, praise God. So we're going to start our outro, and then after that we have that last segment just for our Patreon subscribers. So for those of you who haven't subscribed, subscribe. And everyone will get to hear it because you're all going to subscribe, so it'll be great.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, guys. This is a great episode, and we're glad to have you here with us, where you are, on the show. But there are still some things that we need from you. Your
Love.
unconditional love and support, if that's not too much to ask.
Yeah, unconditional.
All of your money, of course.
That's not too much, also.
But really, we'd like
$3
you guys
a month
to
would be great.
Yeah, that would be excellent.
Yeah, at Patreon.
We'd like you guys to consider supporting us on Patreon. Please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and then Hostile Takeover our Twitter.
Actually, all of our social media needs help, so feel free to just do them all.
We've got big things planned, but we need your help.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And we want each and every one of you to be a guest also, so hit me up.
Please give us... Oh, go ahead.
I was just laughing.
Please give us some feedback. Either, just email us at thewholechurch@gmail.com, or let us know in the comments on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, Mixer, Stitcher, Anchor.
Wherever you
let
can
us
leave
know.
a comment, leave a comment. Join our Facebook page. We like to
Call
hear from
us,
people.
us if you want to reach us.
Come outside my window, shout really loud. Whatever you say, I'll repeat on the podcast, so please don't include profanity. I think that's about it. Speaking of future guests, I've talked to someone. I don't want to say a name because I haven't confirmed, but it sounds like we're going to have a guest on who was an atheist and was converted as an adult to the Mormon faith. So I'm really interested to talk to him, yeah. So more on that later. Who are some other people we have planned? I've been saying Sister Rose for a while.
Yeah. Well, we're going to do another episode with Chandler Goodrich, we think.
Oh, yeah.
We would like to, at least. He would like.
Yeah. I think we'll have Pastor Matt Moorhead on from Crossway Church, also in Wilmington. And then another one I'm really excited for is we're going to have sort of a debate episode or conversation episode with my little brother, Matthew Knoll, who is a Calvinist. And Reverend Keno Kennedy will be back, who, as our listeners would know, is an Arminian. I think most people are Arminian. So we'll have those two talk about the big difference, which is kind of would you call it a wedge issue in the Protestant faith? I think wedge issue is the right term.
Yeah.
But they'll be talking about that, so I'm excited for that. And of course, at the end of season 1, DJ,
we'll have Francis Chan,
who just doesn't know it yet.
Yeah.
But he will soon, because you guys are going to tell us. And we're going to keep tagging him in every podcast.
Right. And then at the end of season 2,
we'll have the Pope.
We'll have Pope Francis.
Yeah. The joke is that the seasons don't end until we finally convince these people to be on the podcast.
It'll work.
Man. Yeah, it's gonna play out. It'll be great. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you so much.